Thank you, Scott. That was just beautiful. It's now a delight, a pleasure for me to welcome and to invite our guest speakers, Jerry and Eileen, to join us up here and to share their thoughts and their ideas and their humor and their wisdom with us this morning.
I love my grandchildren. They bring me much joy.
I love my grandchildren. They bring me much joy.
My name is Eileen. I'm 67 years old. I live in Toronto and I have 4 grandchildren.
My name is Martha. I live in a rural area in South Africa. I think I'm 57, but I have no birth certificate. I have 11 grandchildren.
I think my grandchildren have too much stuff. My 6-year-old grandson has an iPad. And last Christmas, when I was buying presents for them, it was tough. They've just got too much stuff. It's especially difficult to buy for my 16-year-old granddaughter, who's 16 going on 20.
My grandchildren have to share their clothing. 2 of the boys go to school every second day because they share a pair of shoes. Yesterday, the community project leader brought some school uniforms, and we were all very excited.
One of my grandchildren is struggling in school. The others are doing well, particularly in math.
The boys love school, but I know it is a struggle for them, not being able to attend school on a daily basis. I know education is the answer for my grandchildren.
We love having our grandchildren for the weekend, but I have to say that when they go, we're absolutely exhausted and can't wait to get to bed.
I'm tired all the time from looking after the grandchildren, getting water, and tending our garden. There is no time to rest.
I worry about the internet. I worry about bullying in school. I worry about the pressure on my granddaughter to be thin.
I worry that my grandchildren will get HIV and die. I worry that my granddaughters will be raped. One of my teenage grandsons seems to be headed for trouble, maybe even jail.
My husband and I are really busy with volunteer work, and we often find it difficult scheduling time with our grandchildren.
I wish I could find work so I could feed, clothe, and educate my grandchildren.
We boomer grandparents are healthier and busier than the previous generation.
After my husband died, I found out I was HIV positive too. I'm lucky to have medication, but the clinic is far away. My biggest fear is that when I die, there will be no one to look after the children.
I love my grandchildren. I want them to be healthy and happy. They bring me much joy.
I love my grandchildren. I want them to be healthy and happy. They bring me much joy. Well, good morning, everyone. If I haven't hugged you already, good morning. On behalf of Eileen and I would like to sincerely thank you for providing us with an opportunity to tell you about the Stephen Lewis Foundation, the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign, the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, and a little bit more about one of the projects that the SLF supports there. We hope that our introduction was thought-provoking for you and highlights for you some of the multiple differences and yet many similarities that we share as grandmothers and mothers with our African counterparts. I will pass you to Eileen, who leads the granny group, Brookbanks for African Grannies, which we both participate in.
Almost from the moment I watched some of the African grannies at the Rogers Centre in 2006 at the World AIDS Conference, I was captivated by their love of life and ability to sing, laugh, and dance their way through their lives despite what I saw as hardships. I've no idea about their belief system. It doesn't matter to me, as I see love and care shown every day in the way they live their lives. I do believe that children say what they hear and do what they see. The grannies of Africa example beautifully for the children they're in contact with. They are also an example to me. They leave me in awe. Although I'll never personally meet them, the Grandmothers Campaign is a connection for me with those awesome grannies.
How did I become involved in Grandmothers to Grandmothers? Well, I was watching the 16th International AIDS Conference on TV back in March 2006, when I first saw the African grandmothers and began to learn about them and the almost impossible challenges they face in their daily lives. It was inspiring and yet humbling for me to witness both the tears and immense fortitude of these women, and it was at that moment I knew I wanted to help. The Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign is the vehicle I use to support their fortitude and the leadership and compassion which they so readily give to their communities.
Our granny group, the Brookbanks for African Grannies, began with 6 members. In 2006, we've actually grown to about 23 today. Our ages range from 85 to 60-ish. We happen to be all women, but granny groups are described as grandmothers and grandothers. Nobody's excluded. You just have to have an interest in the grannies of Africa and the amazing work they're doing in caring for their grandchildren because their own children have died of AIDS. Brookbanks for African Grannies raises funds for and awareness about the courage of African grannies caring for their children orphaned by HIV/AIDS. We are very proud that since our inception, we've raised $31,140 for the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign. Despite our age range and our varying abilities and interests, we have one goal: to show our solidarity with the grandmothers of Africa, who are an example of love every day.
Just to set the stage here, Eileen and I are part of the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign, so you are looking at and hearing from 2 of over 5,000 grannies who have formed themselves into approximately 240 granny groups coast to coast across Canada. Not bad when you consider in 2006 we started with just 6 groups, And to date, these granny groups have raised approximately $16.5 million. We are not part of the Stephen Lewis Foundation staff. The Stephen Lewis Foundation was founded in 2003. The Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign, as was mentioned, came into being in 2006. Canadian granny groups are all now actively engaged, either in raising funds or raising awareness in Canada, just as we are this morning, about Africa's grandmothers and the orphans in their care. The Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign was launched on March the 7th, 2006 by Stephen Lewis on the eve of International Women's Day. How did the campaign get conceived? It was while Stephen was traveling in Africa in his position as UN Special Envoy for HIV/AIDS that he began to notice an incredible phenomenon. Amongst the illness and death, especially in women and the millions of orphans being left behind, he noticed that in every country, in every community, in every project, grandmothers were playing a crucial, pivotal role. Amongst all this devastation, it was and still is the grandmothers who stepped forward. They bury their own adult children and then, without time to mourn, turn around and start looking after their own grandchildren, and even those of their neighbors who have died. It is not unusual to see one grandmother struggle to care for 10 to 15 children. These women are truly the unsung heroes of Africa, the glue that keeps families together. Often, the grannies are HIV positive themselves because they were unaware of how HIV/AIDS could be transmitted, or they could not afford protective gloves while nursing their own dying children. We know of one granny who between her and her husband, they look after 28 children, and she's HIV positive. This family works in a quarry 7 days a week, and the scratches that she got on her hands from working in that quarry are how she got HIV/AIDS while she was nursing her dying son. I'm thankful to be able to say that the awareness and knowledge that has started to disseminate between more and more grandmothers today, so that they understand what they must do to protect themselves while caring for dying children or grandchildren. The monies that Canadian grannies raise are always designated to grassroots projects in Africa that in some way or another support African grandmothers and the children in their care. This could come in the form of housing, counseling, paying for uniforms for the children to attend school, skills training, but just to mention a few. A little more about the stats surrounding HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. It is many things, but one thing for sure, it's a humanitarian issue. 34 million people live with HIV/AIDS worldwide. 68%, which is approximately 22.5 million, of them are in sub-Saharan Africa, where HIV/AIDS is the leading cause of death. Of these, 61% are women. In Africa, AIDS has a woman's face. In sub-Saharan Africa, nearly 15 million children under age 18 have lost one or both parents to HIV/AIDS. Why does HIV/AIDS have a woman's face? Most are desperately poor, have little or no control over finances, and are economically dependent on men for food, shelter, and security. Most have had to be silent about HIV/AIDS in their families because they suffer from fear-driven discrimination in their communities. Most have little control over their own health or sexuality. Husbands often refuse to wear condoms, and women may not be able to refuse sex. Sometimes Western women are shocked at this, but it's not so long ago since we were in the same position. If I think of my own maternal grandmother, she had 12 children with 2 miscarriages, so she would have had 14 children in total. The birth control pill, which gave women a lot more freedom and control over their bodies, has only been around since the 1960s. In North America and Europe, monogamy is the socially accepted norm, serial monogamy the frequent practice. In parts of Africa, concurrent sexual partners are the norm. This practice greatly increases the spread of HIV/AIDS. In addition, there are many areas of conflict in Africa where rape is a weapon of war. Many countries in Africa have no rights for widows. Women often have no rights of inheritance, succession of property, and even if they do, they are unaware of their rights because they're often in remote villages and have no idea about the legislation that has passed in their countries. Most projects that the SLF Grandmothers Campaign is involved with include workshops on women's rights. Since women are the primary caregivers in most African countries, situations that oppress women put children at serious risk of harm. How is the Stephen Lewis Foundation helping to change the situation? The Stephen Lewis Foundation provides funding that helps to stabilize the lives of many grandmothers, children, and others affected by HIV/AIDS. By funding at the grassroots level, the foundation has made the people most affected by HIV/AIDS its partners and the leaders in dealing with the pandemic. It is this local ingenuity and innovation that has made the Stephen Lewis Foundation funded projects so effective in solving community problems. The foundation has identified 5 areas where it believes it can have the most impact in combating the pandemic. And I'm going to turn you back to Eileen to tell you what those 5 impact areas are and how the application and funding process works for the community projects the foundation supports.
So you can see the 5 impact areas. The Stephen Lewis Foundation receives between 100 and 200 requests every month for funding. It carefully considers all proposals, no matter how small, assessing first in Toronto, where the most deserving proposals are selected for assessment in Africa. It then requests field representatives on the ground in Africa to visit each project to assess its capacity, connection to community, and accountability systems. It insists on the involvement and leadership of women. Once the project has been positively assessed, the foundation can deposit funds directly to the project's bank account within 2 weeks of approval. The foundation works with projects to build relationships of respect, trust, and openness. Once funded, projects submit regular reports to the foundation. The foundation recognizes the knowledge and wisdom of the community. However, it does remain flexible about the use of funds. The foundation is one of the few NGOs willing to accept requests from projects to change the way the funds are used, if the situation changes, such as in the case of war. This flexibility has often rescued projects from potential failure and brought them to a successful conclusion by a different route. From 2003 until June 2011, the Foundation distributed and committed over $54 million to programs. To date, funds have supported over 700 initiatives with 300 community-based organizations in 15 African countries. The Stephen Lewis Foundation keeps administrative fees at or below 19%, well within the guidelines of the Canada Revenue Agency and Imagine Canada's ethical code, of which the Stephen Lewis Foundation is proud to be a member. The Grandmothers Campaign has pledged to keep administrative costs at 10%, and for those of you who know about charity costs, and there's obviously one person in the room who does, this is an amazing number, 10%. Jerry's going to tell you about one of the projects that the Foundation funds.
In today's world, and quite rightly so, everyone is interested in how their donations are handled. We have mentioned several times that our monies go directly to grassroots organizations. Monies do not go via African governments. I think those of us gathered in this room this morning would probably all agree that we see the women of Africa as the ones that do probably 2/3 of the work. So the only project I want to touch on can start to give us hope for the men of Africa, as this project is run by a man. Some of you may have heard of Jackson Kaguri because he has written some books. Thanks. Jackson was born in a tiny village in Uganda and was blessed with an unquenchable desire to learn. I have met Jackson, and I remember him telling us that he was the youngest of 5 children, with a very tough father who owned a small farm. Each school term, 1 pencil was purchased to be shared between the 5 children. So Jackson, being the youngest, told us he never wrote with anything more than a pencil stub throughout his whole school days. He went from a pencil stub and through studying hard became a graduate of Makerere University in Kampala. In the 90s, he became a visiting scholar at Columbia University, where he studied human rights advocacy. He is the founder of the Nyaka AIDS Orphans Project, which was born out of the HIV/AIDS crisis. The foundation has supported Jackson and this project since 2004. His first goal was the provision of a primary school in his village. He takes a very holistic view of providing for the orphans. Not only do they receive a free education, but he is also providing medical care, 2 nutritious meals each day, books, uniforms, and clean water. Among his many supporters who provide funds is the Global Fund for Children. Jackson has succeeded in building a 2nd primary school, and his goal now is to be able to build his 1st high school. Student performance is high, and last year, 97% of Nyaka students passed their primary leaving exams with the equivalent of an A or a B. The grandmothers who look after these orphans have not been forgotten either. The most destitute amongst them have been provided with over 150 new stable homes, smokeless kitchens, and clean sanitary pit latrines. The project also has a revolving microfinance fund that helps the grannies start small businesses. In 2005, the Global Fund for Children helped Jackson to start a gardening program, which has now grown into a 17-acre farm that feeds over 500 children at the 2 primary schools. In conclusion, on this project, I will tell you that in 2012, the project opened and staffed the Mummy Drayton School Clinic, built a gravity-fed clean water system at the secondary primary school, educated 587 children, 96 of whom are double orphans, and served nearly 7,000 grannies. I could go on for a very long time telling you about projects, but we're going to let you have a rest from our voices for a while, and we'll ask for the DVD to be played, if it could please, and to reflect on. And I'll just try and pick up from where I left off. I want you to reflect on that message that those women were giving you. When we first started working in the Grandmothers campaign, it was very hard to be hopeful because the pandemic was so awful. But we are now seeing project leaders here, and they always come with this message of hope. So whilst I've given you dreadful statistics in some ways about the number of the millions, the sheer millions of orphans, and the African grannies who are struggling to raise these kids, there is hope out there, and it's at the grassroots level that action, behind the hope, is taking place, and we know that this is actively happening when we talk to these project leaders. So I want you to keep that in mind, given the service today, and I just want to give you some idea how you can be active with hope in terms of the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign. If any of you have Aeroplan miles, you can donate Aeroplan miles to the Stephen Lewis Foundation. And the way that they are used is when we are bringing grandmothers to Canada, or when Canadian grandmothers, sorry, not Canadian grandmothers, the Stephen Lewis Foundation staff are going to Africa, then that's the time that those Aeroplan miles are used, so that no money comes out of the foundation. The last couple of years, the Stephen Lewis Foundation has had an annual fundraising concert called Hope Rising. So you could come to the concert. It's held downtown. It was Roy Thompson Hall. Yeah. Roy Thompson Hall was the last one, last place it was held. So it's big. It's got room for all of you. You could come and help through that way. We also have an annual DARE program. You know, you can dare someone to get up and sing, or you can dare to have an African dinner. You can do whatever you like as long as you're raising money. You could have a pub night. You could start your own granny group, and there's lots of help to get you going. Don't feel that you're left to muddle your way through that. There's lots of help. You could donate your church space. You could walk with us each year. We have, we've now had 4 years of a national walk that happens coast to coast across Canada, raising funds, and that always happens in June. We're in the process of putting a coffee table book together, which focuses on African grandmothers and Canadian grandmothers. So when that's up and published, you could buy a copy of that. And you could do something as small and basic as collect your small change. And when you've got $20 or more, you can send that money to the Stephen Lewis Foundation, and you'll have a tax receipt for it. So I have to say, in conclusion, that I was really moved by what I heard today in your service. I think it was so appropriate for what Eileen and I and the other 4,998 grandmothers are engaged in across the country. And I just would like to thank you again for having us here and giving us the opportunity to tell you about the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign.